Welcome to History Unraveled AI, where we resurrect the stories that time forgot. You know, when we think of D-Day, we picture a landing craft hitting the beaches of Normandy, right? The massive invasion force. But what if I told you the real story, the one that made it all possible, didn't start with ships and soldiers? It started with a poem, a secret message broadcast to a hidden army that was about to set occupied Europe on fire.
Just listen to that. The long sobs of the violins of autumn wound my heart with a monotonous languor. Sounds beautiful, almost melancholy, doesn't it? Well, on the eve of D-Day, these words, broadcast by the BBC, weren't just a poetry reading. No, this was the trigger. This was the coded command that activated the largest clandestine operation of World War II. A signal for thousands upon thousands of fighters hiding in plain sight, waiting for the word to strike.
And this wasn't some vague hint. It was a precision countdown. On June 1st, the BBC broadcasts the first line. That was the heads up. Get ready, the invasion is coming within 2 weeks. Then, late on June 5th, the second line hits the airwaves. That was it, the final command. Go time. The invasion is happening within 48 hours. Imagine hearing that. After 4 long, brutal years of occupation, this was the moment everything had been leading up to.
So to really get a grip on just how powerful that signal was, we need to go back. Let's rewind the clock to 1940, to the absolute shock of the German occupation and the very first sparks of defiance.
This quote, wow, it's from Henri Frenay, one of the very first people to start organizing the resistance, and it just hits you. He said seeing German soldiers in Paris gave him a feeling of rape. Think about that. The shock, the humiliation. Swastika flags draped over the Arc de Triomphe, hanging from the Eiffel Tower. For the French people, this wasn't just a military loss. It felt like a deep personal violation, a violation of the very soul of their country.
So here's how the country was split. You had occupied France in the north, including Paris, which was under direct German military rule, total lockdown. Then in the south, you had what was called Vichy France, which was supposedly independent but was really just a puppet government collaborating with the Nazis. But let's be real. Whether you were in the occupied zone or the so-called free zone, the whole country was under the Nazi thumb. And that kind of pressure, well, it creates the perfect breeding ground for rebellion.
And life under occupation was just brutal. This wasn't just about soldiers on the street. It was an organized system of plunder. Food disappeared from the shelves, prices went through the roof. If one person resisted, the Germans would execute civilian hostages in reprisal. We're talking about 30,000 people shot just to intimidate everyone else. Then came the horrible anti-Semitic laws, and the final straw for so many was the STO, a forced labor draft that sent Frenchmen to work in German factories. It pushed thousands of people right to the edge.
And it's out of that desperation that something new began to form. At first, it was small things, right? Slashing the tires of a German truck, cutting a phone line. But soon, those little acts of defiance started to connect. Small, scattered groups of rebels began to organize, linking up, and slowly, surely, they started to become a real shadow army.
The name they took for themselves was the Maquis. It's his fantastic word from Corsica that means the dense, thorny scrubland you find in the countryside. I mean, how perfect is that? It's exactly where they operated, hiding in the mountains and forests, a place you couldn't get to unless you knew the way, making it their sanctuary and their base for guerrilla warfare.
And here's the incredible irony. The #1 recruiter for the Maquis wasn't some charismatic French leader. It was the Germans themselves. When they created that STO forced labor draft, they gave young Frenchmen a choice. Go be a slave in a German factory, or go to the hills and fight for your home. Well, you can guess what thousands chose. They fled to the countryside, and the ranks of the Maquis just exploded. It was a massive, spectacular own goal by the Nazis. They literally created their own worst nightmare.
And just look at who made up this army. It was an incredible mix. You had staunch conservatives loyal to General de Gaulle fighting alongside hardcore communists. You had socialists, Spanish Republicans who'd already fought one war against fascism. You had Jews, foreigners, Catholics. I mean, these were people who in normal times would probably argue about everything. But now, they were all united by one single powerful idea: get the Nazis out of France. Okay, but unifying all these different fiercely independent groups, that was a monumental challenge. I mean, getting communists and conservatives to work together is no easy feat. But one man did it, Jean Moulin. He was sent by Charles de Gaulle with this incredibly dangerous mission to forge all these factions into a single coordinated fighting force. And he succeeded. He created the French Forces of the Interior, the FFI.
And now that they were unified, the FFI could wage a whole new kind of war. This wasn't about trench warfare. This was a war fought in the shadows, a war of sabotage, of intelligence, of hit-and-run attacks that would drive the Germans crazy.
And they were incredibly organized. They had these systematic, color-coded plans all ready to go for the moment the invasion began. Plan Vert, or green, was for the railways. Plan Violet, for communications, cut those phone lights. Plan Tortue, my favorite, the turtle plan, was all about blocking roads. The goal was simple. When the Allies land, we paralyze the Germans. We make it absolutely impossible for them to move reinforcements to the beaches.
But maybe their most powerful weapon wasn't dynamite, it was information. Get this, the head of the American OSS, that's the precursor to the CIA, he said that a staggering 80% of the useful intel for D-Day came from the French resistance. Think about that. Where to land, where the German defenses were weakest, troop movements, almost all of it came from these spies in the shadows.
And people like Virginia Hall were why. What a story. She was an American, and she had a prosthetic leg she nicknamed Cuthbert. The Gestapo called her the Limping Lady and considered her their most dangerous enemy agent in all of France. And for good reason. She was organizing sabotage, running spy networks, and get this, when she needed power for her radio to contact London, she would literally hook it up to a bicycle and pedal to generate the electricity. Just absolutely fearless.
So now we come full circle. June 5th, 1944. The second line of that palm crackles over the radio waves. And just like that, the Shadow Army was unleashed. They created absolute hell for the Germans behind the lines. But this victory, it came at a truly terrible price. The impact was instant. It was explosive. In just the first few days after the signal, the FFI launched over 1,000 attacks. 1,000. They blew up train tracks, they cut every communication line they could find, they critically delayed elite German panzer divisions trying to get to Normandy. The chaos they sowed was absolutely essential. The D-Day landings might have failed without it. But the Nazi revenge was barbaric. There's no other word for it. They didn't just fight the resistance, they terrorized the entire population, captured fighters, executed on the spot, like the 87 shot in the Caen prison yard. And sometimes they just wiped out entire villages. The story of Orator Sir Glan is a scar on history. The SS rounded up the entire village, shot the men, then locked the women and children in the church and burned it to the ground. All in retaliation. This was the risk they all took.
I mean, just look at the numbers. They tell the story. By the fall of 1944, the FFI had grown to an incredible 400,000 fighters. But the cost? More than 20,000 of them were killed or executed. Another 30,000 were captured and deported to concentration camps. So many of them never came home. It was a staggering sacrifice. But even facing that kind of brutality, their spirit was just unbelievable. There's this one incredible story from August of '44. A tiny group of just 40 Spanish Republican fighters ambushed and forced the surrender of an entire German column of 1,000 soldiers. 1,000. The German general in command was apparently so ashamed, so utterly humiliated to have been beaten by such a small band of guerrillas that he committed suicide. It just shows you the sheer tenacity of these fighters.
So the story of the French resistance, this shadow army, it really proves that history isn't just made by big armies and loud cannons. It's also shaped in the quiet moments, by anonymous heroes, by acts of incredible courage that nobody sees, and sometimes by coded messages hidden inside a poem. It's why we do what we do here, resurrecting these stories. And it really leaves you with a question to chew on. How does our whole picture of the past change when we learn to listen for the whispers of spies and not just the thunder of war?